Welcome back, I'm Kim Bailey and this is Floral Art Online, the Designs Dissected series, where I submit two of my old designs to our AI DesignEye and have it analyse the designs based on the principles and elements of design, the way we are judged when we're in competition, and to give me some suggestions of what I might do to improve the designs or change the designs around. This week we're looking at two bench designs. This first one the title was New and Nutty, and the second one was Nautically inspired. Both of these designs in their individual competitions won prizes. New and Nutty got a first prize and the Nautically inspired got a second prize. So let's now have a look at them in a little bit more depth and see what DesignEye has got to say about what we can do. So here we have New and Nutty. It was classed as a contemporary design, so I had to use techniques that were current at the time of the competition. The space allowed was 70 centimetres width on the bench, and the height was unrestricted, and it was judged from the front. And you can see it's not just the angle of this image, but I have placed it slightly at an angle on the bench so that enhanced the depth of the design, because one of the things that was difficult with this design was to give it a sense of depth. I wanted to follow a particular contemporary design style that was around at the moment, where all of the plant material was on one level at high up in the design. But I also wanted to ensure that I had some depth in the design because it was going to be very narrow. So as you can see, the base is a piece of timber, and I've actually covered it with empty pistachio shells. Yes, we took one for the team and we ate lots of pistachio so that I would have the shells. That is classed as plant material, and obviously it's part of the Nutty. What I've also done with the empty pistachio shells to make sure that is repeated as a feature that's repeated through the design is I've strung them onto some decorative wire, some bullion wire, and you can see that they're strung through the top of the design. So the remainder of the design is bamboo skewers, and onto those I have taped some water vials and then covered it all with either paper tape that's graded through browns and greens or the coconut fibre. So I've alternated that. I've got a supporting bar that's threaded through these placements so that it gives it a bit more structural stability, and that winds back around. So that's a little piece of skewer, and then I've added some wire and covered it with the paper so that I can curl that back around into the design, bring you back into the design. So the vials have alternating got roses and carnations, little carnations, and I've also put some gum nuts into the top there. Even though they don't need the water source, they're in the same containers to create that uniformity. And in the base I've got two longer stemmed gum nuts coming up to the base of where the decorative part starts on those supports. That is how I put it together. And now let's see what DesignEye has got to say about the design and how it might be improved. If we look at line, first of all, the design features strong vertical lines created by the stems and the wrapped materials, providing a sense of height and structure. The lines are rhythmic and consistent, leading the viewer's eye upwards. It's good that the eye is drawn upward. What I have to ensure, and that's why I've got the curled pieces at the end of that horizontal support, is that you don't go up and then out of the design. So we still want to stay in the design, so we've got to have something that gives a little bit of rhythm and movement to keep you back and interested in the design. And I also need to ensure, because there's so many vertical lines, that the horizontal lines give it some stability as well. So we've got the very thin horizontal line that's threaded through the uprights under the water vials, but also that base, because it's covered with material that gives it a bit of texture, that becomes a feature as well. Not too dominant, and we'll hear a little bit later about the dominance of certain things, but because the flowers are so bright, that bottom base is not overly dominant. Certainly you can see it, but you don't keep getting drawn back to it. You're drawn back up to the brighter colours that are at the top of the design. So let's look at shape. The primary shapes in this design are linear and cylindrical, formed by the wrapped stems and the flowers at the top. The repetitive shapes add to the visual rhythm. So that's good because there's an opportunity because of that base, once again, because it's very rectangular, very straight lines, that that could detract from the overall rhythm, the visual rhythm of the design. So it looks like I have balanced that by the placements at the top of the design. The form is relatively flat and two-dimensional, with most of the elements aligned in a single plane. This makes it suitable for a backdrop or a wall piece. That's very generous comment, because, as I said earlier, I was concerned about the depth of the design. You know, when you've got 70 centimetres of width on the bench, you should be using that as just the framework. So you would normally know how deep the bench is, so you know how that depth of space you've got to use. And probably in this case I wasn't as careful about that. I knew that there was a problem with depth, and that's why I've placed the design at an angle for judging, so that it looks like I'm using up more of that depth of space than I actually have with the design itself. So texture, there is a rich variety of textures in the design, from the smoothness of the flower petals to the rough fibrous material wrapped around the stems and the hard shells on the base. This contrast creates a tactile interest. And once again, that's what I wanted. I wanted textural contrast in the design. Very easy for us with flowers that are smooth and soft to miss out on the textural contrast. So I've got that with the rougher coconut fibre and with the shells as well. Even though one side of the shell is smooth, because of the way I've placed them, we get a different kind of textural effect. The colour palette is earthy and natural, with greens, browns and the vibrant reds and pinks of the flowers. The natural colours contribute to the organic feel of the design. I'm looking at it now, I would like to have seen, I like the colours that are there now, and I think that very vibrant colour in the roses and the carnations does draw your eye up into the design. But perhaps I would have liked it almost reflected as in a softer colour across the base, or somewhere a bit lower down. Maybe it should have been with the just a little bit interspersed within the shells on the base, as though the petals had fallen down, just to give it that balance of colour that I feel is missing from the design. So space, the design uses good use of negative space between the vertical elements, which helps to avoid a cluttered look and allows each component to stand out. And I'm very pleased with that, because with the coconut fibre there is a tendency for it to fill out, and so that's why I've used it in a very limited way. It is very dense, even though you can see through it. It gives a visual density when you use it that you have to be careful of in terms of where that dominance and the balance lies, and missing out on some of the negative space in a design. The design is balanced through symmetry, with similar elements repeated across the composition. The visual weight is evenly distributed, creating a stable and harmonious look. And that's good. Yeah, that balance, as I said, that balance was what I was looking for in terms of this design, and having that symmetrically balanced by the similar elements, even though parts of them are different. So we've still got symmetry because they're all placed in the same way. Contrast is achieved through the different textures and the bright colours of the flowers against the muted tones of the stems and base. This helps to draw attention to the flowers as focal points, and that's great. That's exactly what I wanted. I wanted your eye to be drawn up from the nuts to the flowers at the top, and my interpretation of the title was that this was a new kind of design, because it was a design depiction that was quite common at the time, and it was just how people used that way of having the plant material very much higher up from the base of a design. So that contrast in terms of textures and colours is a good combination to have in a design like this, because if you think about contemporary designs, that really is at the moment what stands out, is that the designs look for contrast between placements, between types of material that are used. So I think I've nailed the contemporary part of that design. The emphasis is placed on the flowers at the top, which are the brightest and most colourful elements in the design. They naturally attract the viewer's attention. So yes, that is where I wanted the focal point to be. I wanted exactly that I want you to be drawn up to where the flowers are. Rhythm is established through the repetition of the vertical elements and the consistent spacing between them. The eye moves rhythmically from one element to the next. And that's good. In looking at it now and thinking about that rhythm, I'm probably a little bit concerned about the coconut fibre in the centre of the design, but if I sort of try and visually take that away, it still needs something else there. So I wouldn't play around with that too much if the rhythm is working. The design is unified by the consistent use of materials and the coherent colour palette. The repeated elements tie the design together in a cohesive whole. So once again, what it's seeing is that it is unified, it is rhythmic, the emphasis is only in one place, the balance is there. So all of those things obviously added to it being placed first in this particular competition. Proportion is well handled, with the vertical elements appropriately scaled in relation to the flowers and the base. The flowers are proportionate to the stems, creating a balanced look. And that's probably the area where I could have fallen foul of the principles and elements of design, because proportion in a design like this, where you're using very thin materials and you're opening it out at the top, and these are small materials, and as I've said in many of the other videos, we need to be careful when we're using small plant material in a larger design to make sure that we've got the mass together so that you get the benefit of a larger proportional space because of that massing of the smaller elements, and that's what's happened here. So let's now look at some of the suggestions that DesignEye has provided in terms of changing this design around. Add depth and dimension. Introduce elements that project forward or backward from the main plane. This could be achieved by adding smaller protruding branches or flowers at varying depths. So this is the area where as I said, most concerned, and it's a little bit difficult to see in the image, but the gum nuts that I've got in the base of the design are actually facing forwards and backwards, so exactly what it's suggesting. But it would like to see something more in the design that gives it more depth, so bring it out more, and I think that I would look at that. And what I could have had, now that I look at it, is some of those vertical elements, so it's maybe every third or fourth one, could have come either at, say, a 45-degree angle from the base, forward or back, and that would have given the design depth without it detracting from that rhythmic nature of the placements that I've got there. Vary the heights, and this would also happen if I did that that diagonal placement, the 45-degree placement of those uprights. It would also vary the heights. So adjust the height of some of the vertical elements to create a staggered effect. This would add movement and break the uniformity. So even though it's happy with the uniform nature of the design, that uniformity is not giving it any depth and dimension, and so varying the heights or having those angles is going to do that. And both of those are things that I would definitely try, because this is a design style that I enjoy doing, and it does give me a bit of leeway to use smaller plant material because I can mass it together in those top placements. So both of those suggestions I am definitely going to try. Enhance colour variety. Incorporate additional flowers in complementary colours or use coloured wrapping materials for the stems to add more visual interest. So this falls into the category that I talked about before of having that bright colour repeated somewhere else in the design, just to give it a bit more impact, I guess it is, and to get that repetition of the colour as well. Create more focal points, add clusters of flowers or unique elements at different heights and positions to draw the viewer's eye through the design. So once again, the angling of those, what are now vertical placements to diagonal placements, would give me that different heights and positions, and so there would be a more rounded, not geometrically rounded, but a more whole design because of that more focal points at different areas within the design. So there we have our DesignEye analysis and our suggestions for new and nutty. let's move on to our second design, which is Nautically Inspired. Our second design for this week, the title was Nautically Inspired, and it was a bench design, as you can see, obviously, and we had 70 centimetres of bench space to use, and about the same, maybe a little bit wider in the depth. And for this one, as opposed to the one that we've just talked about, I actually did use the depth far more effectively than I had in the newer Nutty design. It was judged from the front, and this design placed second in this particular competition. So what I've got here is a branch end of a palm spathe, and often a part of the palm spathe that we don't usually use, but they're good sturdy uprights, I find, for particular designs, and it is drilled into a slice of banksia that you can just see at the base there to keep it upright. The edge of this particular branch of the palm I have wound around and glued on some rope that I made with dried agapanthus leaves, and on the website you can see that technique for doing that, and I've lined that also with some jute string as well. The main part of the palm branch is placed through the palm inflorescence, so it's dried into that twisted, wonderful shape. And that was really the inspiration for this design, because I knew that I had that bit of plant material, and I thought that just looks like turmoil of waves on the water. And so when I get a class title that is anything to do with the sea or water or waves, I'm going to use that bit. So that's why I've used it. I've also attached it, a little bit hard to see, but you can see the edges of it. I made like a fishnet, I suppose, out of the agapanthus rope, and so that's draped down through and across the design. I've used some gypsophila, baby's breath, to give the spray from the wave, and at the top of the design there is some kale, some curly leaf kale, that once again that is for the wave structure, and I've used some tulips because I knew I'd be able to get the bend in them, and some chrysanthemums as the white foam crashing out of the wave. And through the design there is also a little bit of steel grass, just to give it repeat the green colour through, and to give it the circular organic shape of the wave crashing down over itself. So let's see now what DesignEye has got to say about this design for Nautically Inspired. Line, first of all, as always, the design prominently features curvilinear and organic lines, particularly in the woven structures that resemble nets or ropes, which evoke a nautical theme. The linear forms of the flowers add contrast and lead the viewer's eye. So that's an interesting analysis. It's what I wanted, obviously. I wanted that the line within the design to be very much organic or circular in motion, and so I've done that. It's probably the top of the palm branch is probably a little bit more organic. It's got the curve in it, but it could go more towards the straight lines, geometric lines, which detract somewhat from the design when I look at it now. The shapes in the design are primarily organic and asymmetrical, contributing to the natural and fluid feel reminiscent of the sea. The curved pieces of wood and woven materials create interesting irregular shapes. So that's great, because that's exactly what I wanted, and I knew when I looked at that palm inflorescence that I would be able to use it for something that had to do with the sea or turmoil or chaos. And I don't know how far you are in your floral art journey, but for me, it's been over 20 years, and I do look at things now with a floral art eye, and I will look at a piece of material, and I have to confess I have things stored. I've got a storage unit, as well as things that are stored at home, things that are stored on the farm, outside and inside, and so I always have to remind myself when I look at something to say, do you really need this, or have you got something like that somewhere else that you just haven't seen for a few years? So just a word of warning, always be careful about seeing something and thinking, yes, I can use that, unless what I've got into the habit of now is that I look at a piece of material and I think, unless I really need to use it in the next 6 months, that I know that I've got a competition coming up where I can use it, or I know someone who could use it, then leave it be. Let someone else discover it for themselves. Three-dimensional form is well executed, with various elements projecting outwards and creating depth. The interplay between the solid forms of the wood and the airy open forms of the woven material adds visual interest. This is very good, because this is an area, obviously, where if we look at the first design, I had problems with the depth and depth perception. So this one, I have nailed it in that sense. Texture is a strong element in this design. The rough, fibrous texture of the wood contrasts with the smooth, delicate petals of the flowers and the airy woven material, providing a tactile variety. That's true, and I'm happy that it's there. When I think about my depiction here, I wonder if I ever gave texture a thought when I was putting the design together. And that's one of the things that we all fall foul of at some stage. We're so focused on putting the design together that we're not thinking about how it's going to be judged necessarily. We think, oh yes, I've got this interpretation right, I'm going to use this plant material, I'm going to do it this way. And then when you step back and look at it, and this is why I often suggest to you that step away from a design, close your eyes, or take a photo of it and look at it somewhere away from the time that you've been putting it together, because your brain will fill in the gaps for the things that you wanted to do or you think it should be doing. And if you have that independent look, and this is why DesignEye is so good for me as well in terms of review, is that it will look independently. It doesn't know what I was thinking at the time. It just says, yeah, this is right, that's right, these things could be improved. So I genuinely think that I didn't consider texture when I was putting this together. I was thinking more about what the form particularly and the rhythm that the plant material would give. So a good reminder to me to make sure I keep my head in the right place. The colour palette is subdued and natural, with greens, whites and browns dominating. This palette reinforces the nautical theme and creates a harmonious, calming effect. I like the colour palette. I could probably, I'm looking at it now, I probably would like a little bit more white in it, particularly around the bottom part of it, where the palm inflorescence is. But that's for another day. The design makes good use of both positive and negative space. The airy open sections of the woven material allow for a sense of lightness and movement, while the denser areas provide stability and focus. That's true. Very hard in this design, and very hard for the judges, because there is not a proper background to the designs. It's difficult to understand what space is part of the design and what space is just causing a distraction from behind. So I'm happy that an independent analysis can look at this image and say, yes, it's using the positive and the negative space within the design. Probably a little bit less of the negative space than I could have had with that palm inflorescence if I'd opened it up a little bit more and had the space in between the different fronds of that. But let's leave it at it's happy and it's doing all the right things. The design achieves balance through asymmetry, with the heavier, more solid elements on one side counterbalanced by the lighter, more open elements on the other. This creates a dynamic and interesting composition. So yes, it is balanced, and I'm happy with the balance. It's difficult when using those palm spathe branches, because they are physically heavy as well as visually heavy, to ensure that you've got that balanced. And that's probably the one thing, as I said a little bit earlier, that I'm finding looking at that image is that a little bit jarring, is that darkness, which in my brain says it's a heavier weight at the top of the design. So luckily it is balanced with the other plant material, but it would be a concern for me if I was judging. Contrast is evident in the use of the different textures, rough wood versus smooth flowers, and forms, solid wood versus open weave. This contrast adds depth and keeps the viewer engaged. So once again, it's a little bit like the texture comments I made. I don't think I was thinking so much about contrast. I was thinking about I want it to look like the sea. And even though in the back of your mind you know that the sea surface is smooth and then there's all this turmoil of where the waves are crashing over, and that's the contrast that you see in nature. It wasn't uppermost in my mind when I was doing this design, shall we say. Emphasis is placed on the white flowers, which stand out against the green foliage and the brown wood. Their placement at the top draws the eye upward and provides a focal point. That's good. I probably, in looking at it, I probably wouldn't have the chrysanthemums the second time around. I think that draws your eye a little bit too much to that one particular area, and I probably would have more of and have them at different angles, more tulips, more draping of the white tulips. Although, having said that now, I'm thinking I still need a transition material, so I still need something smaller in the white that's going to droop that way, so I'd have to think about that, maybe get some lisianthus or something else that had a drooping quality that was white and was bigger than the gypsophila and smaller than the tulips. Rhythm is created through the repetition of the woven elements and the lines of the tulips. The curvilinear forms guide the viewer's eye in a flowing wave-like motion appropriate for the nautical theme. Exactly what I wanted, so I'm happy that the rhythm is there. The design is unified through the consistent use of natural materials and a cohesive colour palette. The nautical theme ties all elements together, creating a harmonious composition. Good that it could see that was what I wanted within the design. Proportion is well handled, with the larger, more dominant elements balanced by the smaller, more delicate details. The scale of the various components works together to create a pleasing overall effect. That's probably, once again, because of the darkness of the top of that palm spray branch. To me, it's a little bit out of proportion, and that might just be that because of the visual impact it's giving. But the rest of it, I agree, the proportions are right, probably apart from that little grouping of the white chrysanthemums in the centre. Let's now have a look and see what suggestions are being made to change this design around. Increase depth and dimension. Add elements that project forward or recede, such as extending some woven pieces outwards or layering more flowers at different heights. And I think the layering more flowers at different heights is the thing that as I've flagged earlier, I think that's the thing that I would try in this instance. Enhance colour contrast. Introduce flowers with bolder colours, such as deep blues or bright corals, to add visual interest and highlight the nautical theme. I could do that. I probably wouldn't do the bright corals because that's not the effect that I was looking for in this design. But the deep blues might have worked well, and so maybe that could have been the transition drooping type flower. Apart from the white tulips, I could have had something blue or something small blue in with the gypsophila to give it a bit more of an obviously nautical inspiration. Create more focal points. Vary the height and placement of the flowers to create multiple areas of interest, guiding the viewer's eye throughout the design. So that's going to come into effect with removing those white chrysanthemums and replacing them not with that grouping altogether, but having them at different heights and different areas, or introducing some of the deeper blues that we talked about just a minute or so ago. Enhance the nautical theme. Incorporate seashells, small nautical decorations, or even subtle blue and white accents to strengthen the thematic connection. Once again, that's something that I could have done. There isn't really anything. I'm not a big one at this time of competing. I wasn't big on having embellishments. I wanted to see if I could do everything I possibly could with just plant material to interpret a theme. And probably the other thing, and perhaps that's what I could have introduced here, this design is flat on the bench. It doesn't have a base, and perhaps what I could have done is had something that was an unusually shaped base that was covered in sand, or some sand-looking material. Sometimes sandpaper is the easiest way to do it because it'll stick nicely down and gives you that flat surface. And that might have enhanced the overall effect of the design. So that's another thing that I would think about that I've just thought of now while I'm looking at the image. That's our two designs for the week. New and Nutty and Nautically inspired. As always, we encourage you to submit your own designs to DesignEye so that you can benefit from this sort of an analysis as well. Each of the designs that are submitted and analysed by DesignEye is also reviewed by a human person, so one of our judging panel, just to ensure that the comments that come back are ones that are going to be useful for you in your floral art journey. Let's leave it there for this week. I'm Kim Bailey. This is Floral Art Online, the Designs Dissected series.